Hi gang, Rob here. It is the afternoon of 1/1/2019. How about that? New Year's Day. And not a lot going on New Year's Day, so I thought it was time to do a long-term review on this knife, the Will Moon Knives Banshee. A knife that I received, I believe, about the 1st of November from Will. It is left-handed. Just for me, in green Texalium, which is sort of a glass fiber product with a little aluminum in it, suspended in a space age resin. Just gorgeous once you start milling it and polishing it. The Moon Banshee. This particular Moon Banshee is a Bowie blade with a radical crowned clip, 3 5/8 inches long, out of CPM 20 CV modern stainless powdered super steel. The lock mechanism on the Banshee, you'll remember, is called the Moon Spindle lock, similar in performance to a Benchmade Axis lock, but with dual pistons, one on each side, and dual coil springs enveloping those pistons. So it works with 2 fingers quite slickly. The pivot is on caged ball bearings, so you get a completely free dropping mechanism. The pocket clip on the Moon Banshee is a piece of titanium flat stock, beautifully satin finished and green anodized in this case, with a white ceramic dental quality retention ball. And you'll remember, as these knives are shipped, Will has the ball about a 32nd of an inch off the frame, so you can adjust the retention by changing the thickness of the jelly bean of Texalium, the spacer between the clip material and the frame. I have done that. My ball now rests gently on the frame, gives me the perfect retention for a pair of jeans. Okay. If you watched my first video, and I will link it in the description, I generally liked the Moon Banshee in first impressions, and my overall impression of the knife hasn't changed. I've grown to appreciate it quite a lot in the last couple months of carry. And in 2 months I've probably carried this knife with me 10 times or so and spent a lot of time dissecting it, taking it apart, looking at its components. And my daily use for a pocket knife is usually opening boxes and breaking down boxes. That's what I do most with a pocket knife. And after a couple months of use, let's see how that 20 CV is hanging in there. This is ice sharpened, of course, by me. A little wedgy on the geometry, so it doesn't like to do S-curves particularly well, but it stayed nice and sharp. Don't think I strapped it or nothing over those couple months. So steel performance is right where it ought to be with a steel like 20 CV. Ergonomics, I'm still generally liking the knife. A couple of hits that I gave it, and frankly you guys noticed when you commented in that first video, its handle thickness of 11/16 up at the front at its thickest point makes it pretty thick. Not that that bothers you while using it. It does make it kind of a pocket hog. The only area ergonomically that bothers me in use is right here at the bottom of the self guard. You can see a large scalloped sort of chamfer in the body of the knife, and then a large chamfer around the front, the nose of the handle. But right at this point, it's full thickness, and your index finger feels that in an uncomfortable way. I would suggest sort of emulating this chamfer on one more facet. In fact, I may do that myself. If I do, I'll do a follow-up video. I think I'm going to try to alter that frame to make it more comfortable. All the internals are quite a ways that way, so I shouldn't hurt anything by experimenting. Before I get into things I've learned in carry with this knife any further, I'd kind of like to go through some of the internals with you. I took some still pictures And I'm going to set the knife down, and I'm going to describe them as I look at them in my phone for you. So the first picture we're going to look at is a picture of the plates, the side plates for the action inside the knife. So those plates are going to run right here. So they're going to house the pivot, both stop pins, and the axis mechanism. So here's a shot of both of those plates. The plate on the left would be the inside, so the side that you'd see in the blade well, and the countersink in the pivot hole obviously is where the ball bearings run. And then the plate on the right is an anodized and jeweled side. Notice the satin finish one on the left has Will's signature, and then the one on the right is jeweled and anodized, and that houses the pistons for the spindle lock. So I wanted to show you those just so you can get an idea of the level of detail that Will goes to on the parts of the knife that you don't see. The second picture is of the two caged ball bearings with ceramic bearings, and then the bearing washer, the hardened steel bearing washer that rides against the Texalium frame to keep it from wearing. Good quality stuff there. The next picture I want you to look at just shows the pocket that's milled into the Texalium handle, and then the open and closed stop pins. One of the side plates hanging out there on the right. The next picture is the hardware for the spindle lock, and then you can see a couple of body screws hanging out. So a hardened stainless steel barrel with two screws, one on each end, make up the spindle portion of the spindle lock. The screws are titanium and quite nicely detailed and finished. Next picture I want you to look at is the two pistons and their corresponding coil springs. Note on the bottom piston you can see that the smaller diameter is actually threaded, so those are essentially modified screws of some sort that we'll use for the early models. Interesting, as I was thinking about putting this video together and kind of making a list of things I would change, I got a holiday greetings text from Will, and he actually mentioned before I asked that the later models of the Banshee are going to have pistons that have no threads, which will interact much more smoothly with that coil spring. I kind of wondered why those were there. I just assumed they were off-the-shelf screws that were modified to be made into pistons, and the new ones have no threads, so they will be much smoother interacting with the springs. Next picture is, again, a picture of the open pocket of the frame with the pivot and both stop pins, and then one of the pistons and springs installed, so you can see how all that goes together. And then next we've assembled in one of the side plates, and that is it for the internals. I think you can get a good idea for how that mechanism all goes together and works. Pretty cool stuff. And again, the way that the knife is actuated, pretty standard like a Benchmade axis lock. Thumb deployment, absolutely perfect. You can pull back the spindle lock, almost called it an axis lock, and let the blade drop closed, or you can give it a flick. Whoops. Open and closed. Very cool. One thing you can't do is pull back with one thumb and close the blade with your index finger. You're going to need to be working on both sides of that spindle when closing the knife, and we sort of explained why in the first video. Because you're compressing a spring here and a spring here, and the length of that bar, if you pull on one side of it, it binds itself. So just sort of one thing that a Benchmade axis lock can do that the spindle lock can't, but there are lots of other advantages in the spindle lock over the axis lock. Most notably would be the life of those coil springs, which should far surpass that of an Omega spring in a Benchmade. Works really, really well. Okay, what would I change other than this chamfer at the bottom of the self-guard? What would I change on this knife? Well, one of them we already covered, and Will already thought of it, which is the threads on the push rods or the pistons. working with those coil springs. Let's see. Another thing I would do is, I know why Will did this. There is a closed stop pin right here that when the knife is closed bears on the blade right where you see my fingernail end. So like right at the top of the secondary bevel is where that pin is going to hit. He did that so he never gets blade wrap, meaning the cutting edge hitting the back of the handle when it's closed. Actually, I don't think that needs to happen. You know, on an axis lock Benchmade, this surface at the end of my finger, the top of the choil, is what contacts the spindle of the spindle lock or the axis bar in an axis lock knife, stopping the knife when closed. That's really all you need. That closed stop pin really isn't under any force except a little bit of impact when it closes. Certainly no more force is put on that spindle bar when the knife closes than is put on it when it's holding the knife open. So that's not really a concern, and I just don't think that closed stop pin needs to be there. As I looked at the internals of the mechanism, I don't think it can be moved appreciably because it would then impinge on the area where the side plates are. Just get rid of it. It doesn't need to be there. And then in conjunction with that, once that pin is gone, you don't need to fatten up the blade stock where it contacts, and you can go ahead and square away that plunge grind so you don't get that flare at the back of the blade. That would be my advice. But what do I know? I am not a custom knife maker. Let's see, what else? One other thing, and you guys caught this in the comments and I didn't mention it. Location of the thumb stud. What's the most common complaint, especially among guys who love flippers, about knives with thumb studs? Well, you have the thumb stud in the path of the cut. You have cutting edge that comes clear back to here, and you have a thumb stud a full 3/8 to half an inch in front of the base of the edge. What should dictate thumb stud position? Well, interference with the handle would be one, and location for deployment would be another. And if you notice as that blade rotates in its arc, that thumb stud is a solid 1/4 inch from the self-guard in the handle. And if you think about how that would look if you moved it this way, it's not touching the frame. In fact, there's 3/32 of space between thumb stud and frame. If you just moved it right along that's a line parallel to the spine, you could come forward. Oh man, you could come forward a good 3/16 of an inch, and probably have better actuation. On the best action axis lock knives, when the thumb finds the thumb stud just by riding this edge, they work the best, and I think the Banshee would as well. If that thumb stud were moved a little bit forward, when you're opening, you could just ride that edge, and it would open perfectly. Good suggestion, guys who caught that in the comments. Well, hope you're watching. I think that would be an improvement. And if you needed to go ahead and move the profile of the scallop forward and integrate it with that new chamfer, I think you'd be fine. But other than that, guys, those are the only changes I would make. The Banshee seems to be holding up extremely well. If you look at the appearance, how are the materials holding up in their finish? I think very well. I'm seeing virtually no wear on the pocket clip. I noticed the color's changing on my thumb stud. If you look at the difference from the left to the right, when I'm getting a bit of a blue hue, but I'm not wearing through the ano whatsoever. Pretty squared away effort, I think. Do I like it? Do I still like it as much as I did when I did my first impressions video? Yeah, I do. In fact, maybe a little more because I'm impressed about how the knife is holding up, how well it carries, how good it performs as a user for a custom knife. Pretty good stuff. As we talked about in the first video, guys, the Banshee is available in a plethora of handle materials, blade styles, finishes. Check out Will's Instagram and Facebook page if you want to see some examples of the Banshees that he has done. And if you'd like to place a custom order, I'll have his social media info in the description for you so you can get a hold of him. Looks like good things could be happening for Will Moon Custom Knives in 2019 with the Banshee at the forefront. And I'm glad to be able to present this positive update review for you. Happy New Year to all of you. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Moon Banshee is sharp as is the word. Have a nice day.